from? We always love to know where folks, oh my God, look at everyone. We have Brandon, Florida here, Orlando, of course, Orlando, Sarasota. Hi, John. Great to see you from Volusia County, Marco Island in the room. Happy Almost Earth Month, David. Thank you for that. East Orange County, that's where I grew up, Pedro. Great to see you. Cape Coral, Brooksville, Florida is here. Duval. Oh my gosh. Hello from the Caravan Uzbek restaurant. That's wonderful. Melbourne, Space Coast is here. Winter Park. Hi, Dawn. Always a pleasure to see you. Sarasota, Clearwater. And yes, Kathleen, we will record this legislative session review and make sure that it's available to folks who can't be here. And we'll also send you the slide deck as well. So, oh my gosh, Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith is here. Okay, Carlos, you could probably co-host this with me. I love that. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. We got Fort Myers, Miami Beach, Palm Beach County, St. Cloud, Gainesville. We might have someone from every county in the state of Florida. That's fantastic. So grateful. Welcome, y'all. Thanks for making the time. Claremont's here, Fort Walton Beach. We might have folks from everywhere. St. Lucie County. Okay. That's great. I love it. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover and we've established about 90 minutes to do this review. Before we kick things off, I do want to let folks know that we should have captions available if you activate them. I'm going to ask my team to just put those instructions in the chat room on Facebook and Zoom so that you can activate those caption features. So I will give them a minute to do that. I also just wanted to remind you all, as I just noted, that this will be recorded and shared on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. And of course, it's been a very busy day and busy week back in the district. And so I'm thrilled that you've taken the time to join us for this in person, virtually, because there's so much to talk about. And I know it's a lot of attention right now is on the federal landscape, which is very important. And of course, we're engaged in those conversations as well. But to put that emphasis back on the state of Florida, of your backyard, on your state lawmakers, carries a lot of value and a lot of weight. And I'm grateful that you care the same way that I care. And so we have Monroe County too. Oh my God, all the way to North and South Florida. We'd love to see it. Okay, so we're letting more folks into the Zoom room, but let's go ahead and get started. Here's a quick agenda of what we'll be covering today. So we'll be doing quick introductions, and then I want to give you a legislative session, kind of like 101 reminder, especially for folks who have joined us for the first time. And then, of course, talk about the state budget since we don't have a budget yet. I want to walk you through what that means and how that impacts our education silo and teacher pay and so forth. And then we're going to go into a review of bills. It's going to be impossible to cover every bill that was filed and every bill that passed, but I do want to uplift bills of interest, and we'll go through a handful of those together. And then I want to wrap up on mid-decade redistricting and some next steps to get more civically engaged. So, of course, many of you know me, your host, Representative Dr. Anna V. Eskamani, but I wanted to give just a little bit of background to my tenure in public service and, of course, how I came to do this work, because I realized that for a lot of people, you might know me as a state representative, you might know me online as Anna for Florida or Anna for Orlando, depending on what accounts you follow. But you might not know me as the person, as the human. And so I wanted to give just a quick background to how I came into public service and why this work is so important to me. This is just a collage of photos from my life, starting as a kid growing up in East Orange County. This is a photo with me and my twin sister, Ida Eskamani. Definitely don't ask who is who because I will not be able to tell you. And sorry, my camera might be having a little bit of issues. Let me see, because I don't see my camera anymore. Let me see. Okay, I think I'm back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So there's a photo of me and my twin sister here growing up in Orlando. Don't ask me who is who. I don't even know. But then, of course, this timeline takes you through just parts of my life that brought me into leadership. I grew up in a working class family as a daughter of Iranian immigrants who came to this country in search of the American dream. My parents worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. One reason why I care so much about the needs of everyday people is because my family never knew who was fighting for them. They never knew who their champion was. They did not have an understanding of the state legislature and what that meant in their lives. And so as I grew up going to Orange County Public Schools and started to learn more about these systems, it inspired me to want to be that advocate that my family never had. And I credit so much of that passion to my public school teachers who helped me understand the importance of young people being civically engaged. And it was Mr. Norris, my AP government teacher, that made sure that I was ready and registered to vote as a high school student, that when I turned 18, I'd be able to engage in this political process. And he actually inspired me to minor in political science, which eventually became my major. And so this is actually a photo of my twin sister and I. We were leaders of the College Democrats at UCF, and we got to, actually meet President Barack Obama, which, of course, at the time, we had helped elect him as the first African-American president. So just so much pride in that as well. And my time at UCF, I ended up double majoring in political science and women gender studies. I did not stop my academic work. I continued to pursue a dual master's in nonprofit management and public administration, and then continued on to finish my PhD in public administration in 2024. And in that time frame, worked in the nonprofit sector. I worked at Planned Parenthood of Southwest and Central Florida. I became the Senior Director of Public Affairs and Communications in that time, leading a team of 6 across 22 counties. And then, of course, I ran for office for the first time back in 2018. And, the rest is kind of history in that regard. I still work in the nonprofit sector. Our salary as state lawmakers is $28,000. It's technically a part-time job. So I do work full-time in the nonprofit sector to this day. And in that time frame also started a voter registration C3 called People Power for Florida. And we are a statewide organization that provides voter registration support, especially to young people on college campuses. So with all that background provided, I just want you to have a little more information about who I am, why I do this work, my origin story that brings me to public service. And I do want to welcome your questions throughout the conversation. Want to know what's top of mind for you, what your concerns are as we go through legislation. And you can use that chat feature to ask those questions, look up those points, and I will just grab them as the conversation continues. With that said, I serve District 42 in the Florida State Legislature, and I know that there are folks from all over the state that are here with us today. And I do want you to take a time when you can, if you don't already know, to identify who your state representative and state senators are. So I'm going to ask our team to drop in the chat the links where you can just identify who serves you in the state legislature. Having that information is very important as we approach the budget process as well. And I do think having that knowledge, it just gives you more control over local government, more ability to influence local government. These are the municipalities that I have been proud to serve across Central Florida: Orlando, Belle Isle, Winter Park, Edgewood, Maitland, and the historic town of Eatonville. These are the lines of my district. And so remember, there's 120 districts across the state on the Florida House side, and 40 state senators. And I see y'all already dropping some knowledge in the chat of who your reps are, which I absolutely love. And I'll definitely make sure our team drops that link in the chat so you can also check if you're not sure. So just some quick basics, right, about the legislative session. It is a 60-day long process that is outlined in the state constitution. And in those 60 days, our one constitutional responsibility is to pass a balanced budget. That is really the only thing we have to do is to pass a balanced budget. Obviously, so much more happens in that time frame, but the budget is the one responsibility that we are supposed to accomplish. Now, before legislative session commences, which, as a reminder, because it's an election year, legislative session started in January. Next year, it'll start in March. So the start date does shift based on if there's an election year or not. Prior to session starting, we have what are called committee weeks. And if you're a baseball fan, you can think about this as spring training. Basically, it's when we come to Tallahassee, we meet in the committee assignments, but we don't meet on the House floor. But we meet in our committees, we hear presentations on policy implementation, on budget requests from the agencies, and we also start passing bills. But the bills never get to the governor's desk during committee weeks because we're not in session yet. So we're not on the floor. But it's the build up to when that will commence. As I mentioned earlier, it's a part-time legislature. And so we're not there all the time, but we're there for about a third of the year. And of course, special sessions can elongate that. And we already know that there is one special session already scheduled, and that is for April 20th. And of course, there will have to be another special session because we don't have that budget yet. And I'll talk about all of that in a second. And so John actually has a question about this, as is Nicole. Has a date been set for the special session for the budget? Great question, Nicole. It has not been set yet. And Florida law does state that there should be a 2-week notice for when we are in legislative session. And so we have not received any notice for another special session beyond the redistricting special session that I will talk about shortly that you mentioned on April 20th. And then I think I saw another question. Do you think the special session will go to June so I can attend when school ends? There's always a risk that special session can get to the summer, and we have to pass that budget before June 30th, but there is a risk we could go up to that timeline, John. And Lori wants to know, committee week open to public comment or are lobbyists allowed? So great question. Committee weeks are open to the public, and the public can testify in committee meetings. You can meet with lawmakers during committee weeks. So committee weeks, everything the Florida legislature does must be open to the public. Now, of course, private meetings, not always publicly noticed, so they should be, but the committee meeting schedule is public, and every committee meeting is streamed live on the Florida channel. So you should be able to watch them there as well. And so Pedro also wants to know, I heard that there is a special session for property taxes since the Senate didn't pass the House bill. Is that true? Great question, Pedro. We don't have anything announced at this time, but that very well could happen. But no special session about property taxes has been announced on this time. And so I will talk about more of this in the next few slides. So great questions, y'all. So as a reminder, here's the breakdown. This is actually updated because, as you know, we had special elections recently. So this is the current breakdown of the partisanship on the House and the Senate. We do have one NPA, no party affiliation member of the Florida Senate, but this gives you a perspective on the breakdown in both chambers. So Republicans do maintain a supermajority control in the House and Senate at this time. Okay, so just a kind of reminder, right, of different stakeholders involved in the legislative process. And, you know, again, I never want to be repetitive. I know I've talked about this a lot, but I just want y'all to understand like the movement pieces, right? Within this process. So you have every single day different types of stakeholders engaging with the legislature, whether it's in person, in committee, over email, over phone calls, letter writing campaigns. But these are kind of the different like community groups, right, that might engage with us throughout the year. And that includes lobbyists, which are individuals who are paid to represent the interests of their principal. And sometimes that principal might be a corporation. Sometimes it might be a nonprofit organization. Either way, lobbyists are there to pursue the goals of who hired them. And there are lobbyists that are in-house with different organizations, meaning they only represent that one company or that one nonprofit organization or that one municipality. but there's also lobbyists who are contract lobbyists who might represent many different interests. And it's important to note that, lobbyists are a constant part of the process and are a key stakeholder group when it comes to the impact of legislation. Then you have associations. Associations are often represented by lobbyists, but associations are typically going to be like-minded individuals who come together, or folks of a trade group who come together to lobby on issues that impact their industry or impact their interest. So there's many associations like the Florida Medical Association, the Florida Nurses Association, so many. I mean, a lot of associations will do days at the capitals. They come up to Tallahassee. But really, again, important to kind of know that they're an additional stakeholder that engages with this process. Then you have constituents, right? Everyday people who might not necessarily be associated with an organization, but they have an interest, they have a concern, they have expertise, and they're engaging with lawmakers based on how they want you to vote on something, or maybe they have a bill they want you to champion. But constituents are arguably the most important stakeholder that everyone in the legislature should listen to. Nonprofits. So nonprofit organizations are often engaged in the legislature as policy experts because they serve constituents in their districts for an array of issues. And sometimes they hire lobbyists, sometimes they don't have the budget for that, and so they advocate themselves. But nonprofits, I would argue, are another really important stakeholder because they have such a great on-the-ground knowledge that can aid in our decision-making when it comes to policy. And then, of course, donors. I see a question from Christina in the chat. I've heard that bills are more likely to be heard and voted when there are big donors. How can constituents get that bills heard when they don't have that kind of money? So really great question on advocacy. And I'm afraid to say that your point is well said. There are bills that are often prioritized by leadership because a major donor made contributions for that bill to be prioritized. One of the most transparent examples I can share with you is the 6 Hour bill. So 6 Hour is a gun manufacturer, and to make a long story short, one of their most popular firearms that is also purchased by law enforcement has been discharged while in the holster. So this is called ghost firing, where a gun will discharge without a person doing it themselves, and there have been just major injuries because of this. Literally a gun firing while in the holster, shooting up someone's leg. And we have had stories with law enforcement here in Florida who are taking off their vests, they're getting out of their car, and this firearm discharges. So there's been multiple lawsuits from law enforcement, from private citizens against 6 Hour for this faulty firearm. And courts have ruled in the plaintiff's favor, meaning they have ruled against 6 Hour and they've ruled in the favor of the injured plaintiffs. So 6 Hour made major contributions, upwards of $500,000 in donations, more than $500,000 in donations to leadership to try to get this bill through. And the Florida House passed 6 Hour bill. The Florida Senate moved it, but didn't get to the finish line. But it's one of those examples, right, of like clearly bad policy. You had law enforcement speak against this bill in committee, and yet it still moved forward because 6 Hour had made huge contributions to politicians and different political groups. So to answer your question of how can you combat that? So one, if it's bad policy, it's bad policy. And it's really important, and we'll talk about it in this training and this review, but it's really important to know who your lawmakers are so you can communicate directly when it comes to your concerns on policy issues. Some of the most challenging dynamics for me is when someone reaches out to me about a bill that's already passed, right? Because it's hard for me to lift up your concerns when a bill's already gone through that process. So the earlier you get ahead of it, the better. And of course, it's also my job as a lawmaker to be communicative on those issues, but it really is a mutual relationship to inform lawmakers of your concerns proactively. And there are ways to track legislation so you can see what gets filed and if it moves, et cetera, et cetera. The other dynamic to consider is teaming up with organizations and building coalitions so that one voice becomes many voices. Equality Florida is a really great example of this. This is an organization that is a leading voice for LGBTQ plus civil rights, and they have been pushing back against multiple pieces of legislation that are targeting our LGBTQ plus community members, also legislation that tries to target diversity programs and so forth. And they will bring hundreds of people to the Capitol to advocate for or against bills. And they have been very successful because they have been able to build and show up in numbers. So plugging into organizations that reflect your values can also be very helpful in trying to combat legislation and in trying to move good legislation. And we will talk about some of the good bills that have passed, including the ADAP funding, which is funding for HIV/AIDS programs. And that only happened because of advocacy organizations. And so finally, just real quick, I wanted to mention state agencies on this slide. So state agencies are, members of the executive branch. So when I say state agencies, I'm referring to all the different state departments: Department of Health, Department of Children and Families, Department of Corrections, Department of Business and Professional Regulations. Each one of these agencies are also working in the legislature on both policy and budget requests. So every year we pass what are called agency packages. So there'll be a transportation package for Department of Transportation, a regulatory package for DPBR, a healthcare package for DOH. Now, these bills are not clean bills. They often become trains where other issues get thrown into them. But every agency does try to start the process with a priority package of bills, of policy changes that they want to see based on their experiences in implementing current policies, or of maybe federal changes they have to reflect in their policies. One example I'll share that was very controversial was Florida Department of Transportation's changes on sidewalk murals, which led to them erasing murals across the state of Florida. Hidden in the transportation package was language that said the state of Florida has to follow federal policy on street art and so forth. It was a bill that I voted no on, but they used that language to then justify the erasing of murals on city, county, and state roads. And so that was in the FDOT package. It was not a standalone bill. And so important to remember that when you read about policy in the paper, sometimes it's not its own standalone bill. It's hidden into other large trains of policies. And so this is also just how an idea becomes a law. I will not go through this entire chart because we don't have time. But if you've seen Schoolhouse Rock before, you know this process. An idea gets created. It's drafted into bill language. It gets assigned a bill number. It gets assigned committees, and you shepherd that bill through the committee process. The same bill needs to pass both chambers for it to go to the governor's desk. This is a screenshot of flhouse.gov, the Florida House website. If we have time, I can even do a screen share for those who are interested and want to see this more behind the scenes. But ultimately, what you should notice here is that you have typically one big committee, and then you have all the subcommittees, right? So in this example, the Commerce Committee, you have 4 subcommittees that fall under the commerce silo. Same thing for Education, Health and Human Services, and the Budget Committee. These are all budget focuses. So these are the silos of how we allocate funding in the state of Florida, which I'll talk about in a second. So let me see if I can grab any new questions before I move on to talk about the budget. Let me see. Oh, the conflict. So Michael, hi Michael, good to see you. The conflict resolution bill presented by Senator LaVon Bracy Davis, along with Moms Amid Action and other partners, is sitting on the governor's desk as I was told. One goal is to reduce gun violence at the youth level. As session was ended in March, legally, how many days does the governor have to either approve or deny a bill? Okay, great question, Nicole. So just because session ended doesn't mean the governor has the bills yet. And so that actually might be in that chart I just had open. Let me double check this. So right here, right? Enrollment is when the bill is ready to go to the governor, but the Senate president and the Speaker of the House decide when a bill goes to the governor. and they do time it out. So they don't send him or her, maybe one day, they don't send all the bills at once. And so even though session adjourned on March 13th, it doesn't mean all the bills went to the governor. They're timed out. And because the implementation date of most bills is July 1st, there's a runway of when those bills go to the governor. The governor has about 2 weeks to sign a bill when it is sent to them, but it doesn't automatically get sent. The Senate president and the Speaker of the House have to sign the bills, and then they decide when to send them over. And there's politics involved in that, right? There might be a bill that the governor doesn't like, and so they might wait to give that bill to the governor after one of the governor's priority bills gets to them. So there can be some politics involved in this too. Okay. Let me see if there's other questions that I might have grabbed. I think we're good to keep going. I see folks talking about their lawmakers. I appreciate y'all uplifting that. Okay, and Lisa had a great question that we'll grab in a second. Looking at those stats, what do they realistically expect to gain by redistricting? Can sure see why it is so hard to get anything done. Well said, Lisa, and great to see you as always. You're fantastic. Sandy wanted to know any bills for real lower property insurance help for seniors on fixed income. So great question, Sandy. Though as members of the Democratic Caucus, we filed legislation focused on the affordability crisis and property insurance. Those bills did not get a hearing. And it's actually worth noting, if I'm going to go back to this chart real quick. So when a bill is filed and it gets a bill number and it gets assigned to committees, it does not mean that bill ever gets a hearing, right? And so that's the worst part about this process is that even if it's a really good bill and everyone agrees and likes it, it's not a guarantee that it actually gets heard. It's not an automated process. Leadership decides what bills move. If the chair of the committee doesn't like your bill, or if the chair of the committee doesn't like you, that could be a reason why they don't put a bill on the agenda. So this goes back to like the politics involved in this process. And I will try to squeeze in a screen share before we wrap up at 7 o'clock because I want to show you what this looks like on the Florida House website. But that's the reality is that though there are some good bills that were filed about seniors on fixed income and about property insurance, it doesn't mean that they ever have a chance to be heard. And yes, there were less bills passed than in previous sessions, which I'll talk about in a second. Okay, let me talk about the budget, okay? And I'm going to provide some visuals here, so I will describe them for my friends that may be visually impaired or blind. So Florida has one of the largest budgets in the country and actually one of the largest budgets in the world. You know, our state is the size of other countries. And so the sources of our revenue come from three main places: general revenue, state trust funds, and federal trust funds. And if you're looking at the pie chart that's on the left side of this screen, you can see how this is broken down. So $26.2 billion comes from state trust funds, $35.7 billion comes from federal funds, and $51.7 billion comes from state general revenue. This is all your tax dollars, right? Like, it's not my money, it is your money. This is money that comes from the people of Florida and the context of the federal funds, people of the United States, right? And federal funding is a lot more restricted because federal funding is mostly reimbursements for programs like Medicaid. And Florida is very reliant, as you can tell, on federal funding. It's about it's over a fourth of our budget, right? It's federal funding. State trust funds are specific restricted dollars that come from very specific places. So, for example, when you buy gas at the pump, which we're all feeling the pain of increased gas prices right now, the gas tax that you pay, part of that stays with local government. The other part of it goes to the state of Florida into the Transportation Trust Fund that pays for state road projects. And I'm going to show you a list of other trust funds. Of course, trust funds often get swept to pay for other things, but they're meant to be more restricted to those purposes. And then you have state general revenue, $51.7 billion dollars. This is the most flexible of money. This is the money that really the legislature has the most decisions to make because it's what gets allocated to different issues and silos. Um, Most of this comes from sales tax revenue. And of course, about 15% is from tourists. About, I think, 6 billion comes from the corporate income tax, but most of it comes from the everyday consumer. And if you're in Orange County like I am, when you buy something at a store, you pay a 6.5 cent tax on that item per dollar. That half cent goes to Orange County Public Schools, but the 6 cents goes to the state of Florida. And it adds up really fast, as you can see. And so this adds up to about $112 billion dollars. And by the way, this is the draft Florida, like what I'm about to show you is the draft Florida House budget. And the reason why we have a draft budget is because part of the legislative process is the House and the Senate first create their draft budgets, and then we debate our draft budgets to get to a final budget. That's where the tension is right now. Both chambers have crafted their draft budgets, but we haven't come together to work out a final budget. And I'll show you a visual of that in a second. So here's some examples of other trust funds in Florida. Again, that's the $26 billion. So these are examples of trust funds. The Florida Forever Trust Fund, the Educational Enhancement Trust Fund, Water Quality Insurance Trust Fund, the State Transportation Trust Fund, and the State Operated Institutions Inmate Welfare Trust Fund. And this is actually money that comes from the incarcerated. And it's supposed to be spent on improving the incarcerated system and the infrastructure of our state prisons and so forth. This is a really important visual from Florida Policy Institute that just kind of shows you Florida's heavy reliance on general sales tax revenue over other types of revenue sources compared to other parts of the country. And the reason why this is important is, for those who don't know this, because Florida is so heavily reliant on sales tax, it means that we have one of the most regressive tax structures in the nation. That means that people who make less pay more into taxation than those who make more. When I say we have a regressive tax structure, that's what it means. So it's not a political term, it's an economic term. And I see a question in the chat about the Florida Forever Trust Fund. Is the Florida Forever Trust Fund the same thing as Land Acquisition Trust Fund, the one with over $1 billion in it, yet the House is proposing to spend zero in Florida Forever? Yes, pretty much, right? We always want to fully fund Florida Forever. And the issue is that those trust fund dollars get swept to other places. So Florida Forever is supposed to be for conservation, land acquisition, but it does get swept into other categories. So great question, Jean. And that answers Ray's question as well, where the Florida Forever money is not always spent appropriately. In fact, I think one of the most egregious examples of environmental dollars being spent incorrectly was when Florida Forever dollars were used to pay for maintenance of like a state park equipment, when the point of the trust fund was to expand conservation dollars. The initial use of it was to cover the cost of current expenses. And this is a very common pattern where new sources of revenue are used to replace current expenses versus expand the footprint. And we see the same thing with the Florida lottery. A lot of folks ask me all the time, isn't the Florida lottery supposed to go toward educational enhancement, right? But what ends up happening is that the money from the Florida lottery, it just covers the current expenses. It doesn't necessarily expand the scope of impact. And so this is again why, like, I know I'm spending a lot of time on talking about the budget, but I just think it's so important to understand this piece of the puzzle because a budget speaks to our values and it determines the pay of our educators. It determines what dollars we have for affordable housing programs. It determines public transportation infrastructure, public safety. It is such an important element of this process to understand. And I really want to take the time to emphasize it to you all tonight. And so this is the current draft House budget, okay? So I want to show you how the House is currently allocating your dollars in the draft budget. And remember, this includes those, three main silos that I talked about. So federal, trust funds, and general revenue. So as you can see, human services is our largest expense. A lot of this is also federal reimbursement. So the federal support really goes into human services. But this also includes foster care, child welfare, food stamps, Medicaid. So a lot falls under human services. And then you have education, which includes early ed, K to 12, and higher education. That's the second biggest expense. And then you have natural resources, environmental, etc., as 16%. And then you have criminal justice and corrections, general government, and the judicial branch. And this is always like super problematic. I mean, I would point out that judicial branch and general government, I mean, the fact these are so low is it should be concerning because this speaks to how we do not appropriately fund state workers at all. And this speaks to why we have such a fee and fine based judicial system. If we're not fully funding the judiciary branch, then you will have a system that is not accessible to every person. And I think it's always important to emphasize that point. When I see these numbers, those questions like come top of mind for me. I have a few more visuals I wanted to share. So this shows you just like the budget silos over time. So basically you can kind of see, so this is the color code, right? Green education, this like kind of coral is human services. So you can just, if you look at this, and again, these are not the final budgets, these are draft budgets, but you can kind of see how funding has slowly gone up for these different silos, except the judicial branch actually went down. I see a question about what percent of the education allocated for the new voucher system. It's upwards of $4 billion, if not more, right now. So it is an excessive amount of money going to privatize school vouchers. And so I'm gonna just really quick, I want to show y'all a visual. This is the text, but I'll just show you this visual. So I created this little diagram to explain the budget process more clearly for folks. It is a little complicated. So the governor is required to give us their budget recommendations prior to session starting. And so we'll get that recommendation. And then during those committee weeks, we'll hear presentations from the governmental affairs staff or the budget staff of each agency. So they will present to the silo what every agency budget needs are. And then the House will draft its own budget. The Senate will draft its own budget. And as a reminder, the budget also includes what are called LBRs and APRs. So an LBR stands for Legislative Budget Request, which is the funding request by agencies, by governmental agencies. APRs are appropriation requests, and these are requests made by lawmakers via their community. So, for example, the city of Winter Park, the historic town of Eatonville, city of Orlando may work with my legislative office and a senator's legislative office to make a funding request of the legislature to bring money specifically to our districts. And so we will advocate on behalf of those organizations. It's not just local governments, nonprofits can also request money from the legislature. So we will advocate on their behalf to get a line in the budget for those projects. And then we will vote on our respective draft budgets separately. And then we will go into what's called budget conferencing. And this is where we are not like, this is where the pause has been, right? So we did all of this already, but we have not started conferencing. And conferencing is when the House and Senate come together to craft one final budget. But when there's disagreement on prioritization of funding, when there's disagreement on other policy issues, when there's disagreement on the tax package, on property taxes, all of that can impact the ability to go to conferencing. So when we go back to Tallahassee, whenever we're called back for the budget special session, we will likely pick up where we left off, which is right here. And then eventually a final budget is approved by both chambers. And this goes through like what I described earlier, the conferencing process. Basically, conference committees are created that are made up of House and senators together, where then we kind of meet together to debate specific lines on the budget to get to one final budget. And then we'll each pass our respective budgets. There has to be a cooling off period when the budget is given to us of 3 days before we can vote on it. And then we vote on the budget and we send it to the governor. And remember, the governor does have what's called line item veto authority. So governor can veto anything that he wants. And he 2, 3 years ago vetoed the entire line for arts and culture funding in Florida. And so that line item veto, the legislature can override it, but it's very rare. But it can be frustrating because if you're an organization that got something in the budget, you've worked that entire session, you've built relationships across the aisle, you've done this in a bipartisan way, but you get to the governor's desk and then you are vetoed. And so it's a very frustrating process, but it's a part of the checks and balances of our political system in Florida. Okay, so I saw some questions about so Leslie wanted to know, how is the budget conferencing representation picked? So it's leadership, it's a speaker and the Senate president that decides. And they actually, for the 2026 regular session, already issued the conference committee members. But I think because we're going to a special session, they're going to have to make that announcement one more time. So for example, I was appointed as a member at large, which means I can float between all of the conference committees. But because session adjourn, sine die, I think they're going to have to issue that memo again when we do have our special session. But it's a very top-down process in the legislature. So we always we kind of refer to it as the fourth floor. So if we're in the Florida Capitol, the fourth floor is where the doors are to the chambers, but it's also where the speaker's office is and where the Senate president offices is. So the fourth floor decides is kind of like the lexicon for the process. You might also hear the term plaza level. What does the plaza level think? And that's where the governor's office is. So just some, fun little insider language for y'all to know. Okay, so funding for public education. Wanted to just review this quickly, right? So Florida's public K-12 education system is funded through a mix of, as I noted earlier, state funds, local funds, and federal funds. And of course, those federal funds are often tied to very specific programs. There's also the FEFP, the Florida Education Finance Program. This is the core formula that Florida uses to allocate funding to school districts to make sure that they're equally distributed based on need and the district's ability to raise their own revenue. This formula, of course, was established in 1973, but it's been updated many, many times, including, I think, as recently as when universal vouchers came into effect, so about 2 years ago. The FEFP is supposed to take into consideration numerous different elements and variables, including what's called the BSA, the base student allocation, which is the amount of funding set for per student, the different weighted factors. So as I mentioned, there might be reasons why a school district will get more state dollars based on some of the dynamics and demographics of the district, cost of living differences, and also what's called the local required effort, or the RLE. And this is the minimum amount each school district must contribute using local property taxes. And so that formula will then determine how much money every school district gets. I would argue that it's a very imperfect system because oftentimes larger school districts don't get enough funding because there's an assumption made that they have the ability to generate their own revenue. And we definitely don't see that as the reality. And Anne actually just made a great point in the chat that every county needs more BSA. And I definitely want to agree with that as well. And yes, and Shayla from the Florida Council of the Blind also writes, what is going to happen to our visually impaired students throughout the state? And it's a great question when it comes to funding for our students with disabilities. And there's been a larger concern as it pertains to the role of the federal government when it comes to IEPs and ADA and so forth. And I'm a firm believer that if we lose federal funding, that the state of Florida should make up the difference so that our students with disabilities are not going to be left behind. And of course, many of us have filed policies around that subject, but it is very important to uplift the importance of increasing the BSA, but also the importance of categorical funding, which is funding that is specifically for different categories of needs, because that funding should protect and ensure a direct allocation towards specific issue or need, regardless of what the BSA is or isn't. So Margaret also write, where does the state funding for crisis pregnancy centers appear in the budget? Great question. That appears in the health silo, the human services silo. And they have funded CPCs upwards of $6 million every year. And that would be in the human services budget. And I can show you guys what the budget looks like right now if we have time. So stay with me. If you want to learn more, I can try to be here all night. Okay. Except I do have a Zoom at 7. Okay. So what's the best way to try to get air conditioning in prisons passed in the budget? So that's a great question. So there's been some amazing advocates on this issue, yourself included. Also, Connie, big shout out to Connie, who comes to Tallahassee to advocate for air conditioning. So that would fall under the corrections budget. And I think the advocates are doing an awesome job in pushing for this issue. I do think part of it is, one, for the construction of any new prisons, to ensure that new prisons are designed with air conditioning, and that is prioritized in any construction of new infrastructure. But for older established infrastructure, I think pilot programs, which is what many of the advocates work on, is going to be the best way to get something through, because it is a cost, but obviously I would argue that it's an important cost to incur, because especially in the summer times, it is inhumane when it comes to the conditions in the carceral system. And so definitely want to echo the efforts already being pursued by advocates, and to encourage y'all to keep going. Okay, some great questions coming in. How big of an issue is declining enrollment in public school districts and the layoffs that are happening? It's very, very, very big. It's a very big issue. So I mentioned the BSA, right? The base student allocation. So a school district only gets the base student allocation if the student is going to that school. And there are issues, obviously, with students, parents choosing to go to a private school. So that BSA never coming to the school district, but going into a private entity. And sometimes those students want to go back to a public school and the BSA does not follow them. But the reality is that the less students that show up, the less BSA you get. And so whether it is privatization leading to children leaving the public system to a private system, or it's the chilling impact of the immigration policies coming out of the White House and out of the governor's office that have led to thousands of students going missing in Orange County, or it's also the reality of demographic shifts, right? And families moving to different places, or family sizes getting smaller. All three of these factors have led to an environment where schools are closing across the state, including Orange County. My elementary school is closing, Bond Elementary School. And that is due to declined enrollment, which means there's less money to pay for the building and pay for teachers. Do vouchers have an impact on the BSA? Absolutely, they do. The BSA is the amount of the voucher, right? So right now it's like $8,000 some dollars. That's the voucher. So the BSA determines the voucher amount. And actually there was a report by the Office of the Inspector General, the OIG, that said that billions of dollars went missing because of universal vouchers, because the money was not following the child. The state of Florida was unable to track where billions of dollars of money went, to a point where OCPS had to dip into reserves to pay for the everyday cost of their annual budget. And then eventually the state of Florida reimbursed them for it, because it was the state of Florida's fault for losing money, basically. And the Florida Senate took that report and crafted legislation to address the findings in that report. But the Florida House at this point has not heard that bill yet. But there's a huge opportunity here to pull back that program, and whether it's universal vouchers or schools of hope, there are opportunities to pull back on that program and also ensure stronger guardrails on its implementation. And of course, I voted no on your universal voucher because I do consider it to be problematic policy. Um, is there anything we're doing right now to stop wealthy families from using our taxpayer funds to fund their kids' tuition? Great question, Marissa. We have filed legislation around that, but it has not been heard. And so, as a reminder for folks, because of universal vouchers, even families that can afford private school are receiving the BSA per child. And again, that's not imaginary money, it's money that comes from education funding. I've heard rumors about cuts to ESC programs. Have you heard anything about that? I have not, but I do know that because the COVID-19 dollars that local school districts received have come to an end, that layoffs are happening with some of those departments. Departments around like school support staff, safe, maybe safety specialists or mental health support staffers. So unfortunately, because those COVID dollars have come to an end, I do know that there are going to be layoffs happening in that regard. Okay, y'all, some great questions coming in. I'm going to have to keep moving because we're already at 6:30. I got more slides to cover. Did DOGE investigate the funding disappearance related to vouchers? They did not. Great question. But the Office of the Inspector General did. And that's why we don't need a DOGE because we already have the OIG that does a good job. The issues the legislature ignores those reports. Um, with fewer students in public schools and less money being allocated for public education, are special needs children being served appropriately? That's a really great question, Rachel. Candidly, I would say that there's a huge need for more funding to support our students with disabilities and our special needs kiddos. I do a lot of work in this silo, and I hear from parents all the time who are proud to choose public education but do not feel like they're getting the support that they need. And so I think it's a ripple effect. Our school districts benefit from that shared commitment, right? When you have a enrollment at traditional levels, the funding that is collected from the BSA can benefit everyone, right? And that's the beauty of public education is that it's about the collective good. And so obviously students with special needs require more resources and a smaller teacher to student ratio. So that's going to have a bigger cost. But the students that don't need that type of support, they're helping to support those students who do. That's why public education works, right? We all support this process because we each benefit from it. Even if we don't have children in the school district, we want strong, high quality schools. It's the workforce generator. It helps reduce poverty and crime. We know literacy rates are essential to an informed society. Like we each benefit from a strong public school system, even if we're not directly impacted by it in our lives. But the challenge is that this prioritization scheme disrupts the entire ecosystem. Okay. And so, yes. And Suzanne writes, with federal education money decrease, so Florida rural education, will there be more transparency with vouchers going forward? So as I mentioned, the Florida Senate passed a bill unanimously for more transparency and accountability, but the Florida House has yet to do that. And I do think it's an important budget conversation. And folks, if you care about this, you should contact your state representative and ask them to implement accountability with the voucher system, especially in the state budget. Okay. We talked about a lot on this slide, so I'm going to move on from this slide because I do want to talk about some of the bills. Okay. So we're going to shift a little bit to talk about policy. So we just spent the last 30 minutes talking about the budget and legislative session 101, but now I want to shift to talk about legislation. So as a reminder, there were 1,896 bills that were filed, and there were 273 bills that passed both chambers. This image, on the right, I'm sorry, tired, left side of the screen, is me and Representative Chase Tremont. And so here you have a Democrat and a Republican working on legislation together. I'm proud to pass bipartisan legislation. I'm proud of an opportunity to work across the aisle. We are probably an unlikely duo, but we both care deeply about our children with autism, and we worked on elopement prevention policy together. And so I share this as an example because most of the bills that pass are bipartisan, But of course, there's many bills that are not, and we'll talk about both of them. But I want to just emphasize for a moment that the polarization that we see across the country and in our own state, it's it is present, unfortunately, but there always are opportunities to find common ground to secure policy that benefits everyone in a bipartisan way. So I want to share that as one example, right, of the efforts to find common ground and work together whenever possible. Okay, so I broke this down into bills of concern that passed, bills of concern that did not pass, and then some positive bills that did. And I want to be really clear. It is impossible for me to cover all 237 bills that passed, okay? I wish I could, but we just don't have enough time. So I really just pulled some of the bills that got some attention in the news, but also the bills that didn't get attention in the news that you should also care about and know about, okay? And I put some exclamation points around the ones that I'll have time to talk about, but I will email this slide to anyone who RSVP'd. We'll make sure you have this slide deck so you can look at it later and you can check on these bills in your own time as well. But I'll do my best to cover a few of them, okay? So, election integrity, House Bill 991. This is the Florida SAVE Act. And so if you've heard about the SAVE Act at the congressional level, this is a Florida version of it. So it's very concerning, especially as it pertains to voters who have last names that have changed, voters who don't have a real ID yet, and student voters who use student IDs. And so it requires more documentation for new voters, voters who update their registration, are going to be required to show more documentation to do so. I think the most concerning part about this bill is that it gives Secretary of State the authority to basically decide which voters he deems to be ineligible and are required to showcase more evidence of their citizenship status. As a reminder, there is no example of a non-citizen voting in Florida. It's a unfortunate political manufactured concern. And so you have to ask yourself that if there is no problem, what are they actually trying to do? And I do believe firmly they're just trying to make voting overall more difficult for people. And no, DeSantis has not signed this into law yet. The bill has not been sent to the governor yet. So as a reminder, most of these bills are still waiting his signature because they haven't been sent to him yet. So we'll definitely share online as these bills are sent and signed. And yes, so Shayla also writes, what will it do to those who are blind and wish to vote with accessible absentee? So the other issue too, right? So the bill did not change a lot with vote by mail. However, it does change the ability for supervisor election offices to use the more accessible the more accessible voting tools. So obviously, if you go to if you go to a polling site, you can ask for a more accessible voting option. But a lot of SOEs have made that the status quo. They purchase voting machines that are all accessible so that someone who is visually impaired or blind doesn't have to ask. They just automatically have a machine that's accessible to them. And the bill basically changes that. And so now you're going to have to make that request, which obviously not every person is comfortable doing. And so that piece is concerning from my perspective for the disability community. And then how long before they have to send to the governor? So as long as it's before July 1st, they have a little bit of flexibility to do that. And so the bills have already been sent to the governor in batches. So I would expect, but they could send it in May. They could send it in June. It does not have to be right now. Okay. Senate Bill 1296. This is legislation around union busting. So this targets public unions, but carves out police and fire unions, but basically makes it much harder for a union to be certified and for a union to exist by requiring a majority of all potential voting members versus just those who voted. So for example, let's just say you have 300 members of your union and there's a vote and 150 vote and 60 let's just say we'll use easy numbers. So there's 300 members in totality, 150 vote, and 100 vote in the affirmative. In most elections, you would say, okay, that's the affirmative. That issue passed, right? What this bill says is that unless everyone votes, it doesn't count. So you have to get 100% voter turnout, which is very difficult to do in any election, let alone a union election. So basically tries to make it much more difficult for unions to be certified and to even exist. And then you have House Bill 1471 and Senate Bill 1134. So 1471 is titled Systems of Law and Terrorism Organizations. So this is legislation that it's a serious First Amendment concern because it gives the governor and the cabinet the power to designate advocacy and religious groups as, quote, domestic terrorist organizations and punish those who, quote, promote them with sanctions. And even if you're a student, you could be expelled. And so it really gives, I would argue, just unfettered power to a political body that is not trained in safety or security to decide what organizations are domestic terrorists. And of course, the concern is that this would be weaponized to target speech that the state doesn't like and then punish those who promote their speech. And then Senate Bill 1134, this is known as the anti-DI bill. So this is an omnibus bill that prevents local governments from funding diversity programs and cultural events, while also giving the governor power to remove local elected officials from office. And so this has a huge ripple effect in the sense that many of our communities are incredibly diverse. And so, for example, we just hosted the Persian New Year celebration at the Orlando Museum of Art. That event is funded by individuals like me. I spent my own money on funding that event, as did other organizations, but it also took place in a public venue that the city helps to facilitate because Nowruz is not a federally or state approved holiday. It's a Persian New Year, but it's not an official holiday in this country. The city would not be able to participate in that. And the city could not even attend that event in their official capacity. So that's the consequences of this type of legislation is that it creates a blanket of censorship where only state approved holidays are the ones that you can engage with. And the risk is removal from office if you do. So Rachel wants to know, would either of these bills withstand a lawsuit? So great question. Lawsuits will be filed, especially when it comes to the First Amendment. Lawsuits will be filed because the United States has the strongest free speech constitutional protections in the world, and it's something we're very proud of, despite obviously that it can also lead to speech being expressed that you don't like. But the best way to combat speech you don't like is through speech that you do, right? And so I'm very confident that lawsuits will be filed. I'm very hopeful that the outcome will be positive. But at this time, they're still waiting to be sent to the governor. And so we'll see what happens in the weeks ahead. But I do feel like these bills will be unconstitutional. And just for your awareness, when we debate these bills and ask questions on these bills, we're also putting for the record concerns of constitutionality. So we're actively asking questions that can be the foundation for a lawsuit. And then Barbara wants to know, is there a specific time period in advance of a special session that it must be noticed? 2 weeks. So Florida law says 2 weeks. Okay, let me see. So I'm going to keep moving forward. Again, there's a lot of other bills here that I don't want to ignore. But we just don't have time to cover all of them. But again, I'll send this slide deck out to folks later so you can look at it another time. But I also want to talk about bills that did not pass, right? So these were bills of concern that did not pass. I talked about the 6-hour bill already. I did want to also talk about the farm bill and some of these land use bills, right? So some of these bills pass, so we stop the most harmful provisions in them, okay? So for example, if you care about the rural boundary and smart planning in our state, and, protecting the environment, then you should be really, really proud because we were able to stop a complete elimination of Orange and Seminole County's rural boundaries, which was a fight on the Senate floor that was trying to be inserted into House Bill 399. And we were able to stop that, which means that the voter approved rural boundaries will still be in place today. And rural boundaries basically try to encourage urban growth in the urban areas versus sprawl in the rural areas. And so we were able to prevent that type of preemption in 399 and the Blue Ribbons Project bill. This was a major, there was a major donor, a hedge fund guy, that was putting money into this legislation. He was funding lawmakers to get this passed. That would have basically allowed large landowners to build city-sized developments on rural land without any say from community residents or local elected officials. And we were able to stop that bill. And then in the farm bill, there was a policy that was trying to get added to this that came from the sugar industry that wanted to basically criminalize people that talk about the public health concerns of their food. And so this is where we saw the MAHA movement and the environmental movement actually lock arms in opposition to this bill because it was going to censor and even criminalize if you spoke out and said, sugar is bad or sugar is hurting the environment or these chemicals in my food are of concern. Like it was basically food libel legislation, and we were able to get it removed from the bill. And I also want to give a shout out to journalists because journalists helped on this effort as well. So that was another good win that we had. Marissa wants to know, these bills can be brought back up again, correct? Yes, they can next year. Well, here, let me give you some context here, right? So special sessions can be called by the governor at any time. And when a special session is called, it has a very specific purpose. And so, yes, these bills can be refiled in the future. Most likely they be refiled in the 2027 session, which starts in March of next year, but committee weeks start in January. But there also is a risk that these issues could come back up during the budget process. They could be snuck into a budget proposal. Or if the call for special session is enlarged, it could also be considered during special session. And so definitely be mindful of that. It's important to be on guard for all these issues because especially when there's a major corporate influence behind it, it just makes it more likely that these issues would come up. So important to definitely be aware of that. And yes, I see a question from David. Blue Ribbons Project was publicly supported by the incoming Senate president and opposed by a former Senate president leaving the chamber, being replaced by the House sponsor of the bill. How will it be stopped next session? So there actually was also opposition to the Blue Ribbons Project bill from North Florida lawmakers because the land, of course, there's a lot of plots of land that could be impacted by this bill, but the main proponent of this legislation owns thousands of acres in North Florida. So opposition to this bill also came from House members from North Florida. And so the good news is that the next Speaker of the House is from North Florida. So I'm very hopeful that he'll continue to slow down and oppose this type of legislation. But this is why your voice really matters, right? And you want to be proactive in engaging with lawmakers on these issues and expressing your viewpoint on them. So Annie also writes, I'm going to ask my team to turn on the light for me because it's getting kind of dark where I am. So I appreciate it. Do you think that property tax will resurface anywhere other than maybe slipping into the budget somehow? Maybe that's why there's delay on scheduling reconvening for the budget. Sorry if you already answered this. I got disconnected for a couple of minutes. Thank you, Victoria. So let there be light. Okay. So great question. The property tax language cannot be snuck into the budget because it is a House joint resolution. So I know this gets a little bit more wonky, but basically voters have to approve any changes in property taxes. So it can't pass as a bill. It has to pass as a standalone House Joint Resolution, which requires a two-thirds vote by the legislature. And then if the House and Senate both passed it, it would go to the governor's, it would go to the voters as a constitutional amendment where it has to pass with 60%. So you can't just sneak it in. It has to be a standalone policy and it has to be an HJR. Um, and so let me keep going, y'all, because we're about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure I cover some more of these policies. Um, um, I also want to amplify that we were able to stop all new attacks on reproductive health, and we were also able to attack most of the pieces of policy. I'm sorry, we were also able to prevent the passage of most of the bills that were targeting the LGBTQ plus community. And so it was something to be proud of in the sense that we were able to stop bills that were impacting bodily autonomy and impacting personal decision making. I do want to flag that there were several bills filed in the context of reproductive health, including restrictions on surrogacy that would prohibit same-sex couples from being able to become parents through surrogacy. This legislation also would make it nearly impossible for someone to be a surrogate in Florida. And there also was legislation to restrict IVF. And so obviously Florida has a 6-week abortion ban in place right now, though that did not stop bills from being filed that wanted to restrict access to abortion. But it's interesting to see a shift towards other types of reproductive healthcare services being targeted in the same way. So I definitely wanted to amplify those policies and make sure that they're on your radar for the future. And then this is just another list of bills that were filed but did not pass, including restrictions on books. What else we got here? Oh, the liability protection for pesticides, which is really bad. Efforts to make Florida's unemployment system more difficult to access. And so we were able to prevent many of these bills from passing. Yeah, HB 133 as well. Okay, so here's some positive bills, bipartisan bills that passed with Republican and Democratic support that I wanted to share because, again, I feel like we always focus on the bills that we don't like. We also should talk about the bills that we like and that are bipartisan. So, actually, one of these bills are my bills, and so I wanted to highlight this bipartisan bill on drowning prevention. And so, Senate Bill 428. This is a bipartisan bill that is focused on preventing accidental drownings of newborns and young children. It expands the access to Florida's free swimming lesson program, but then it also requires that new parents are given information about the risk of drowning and drowning prevention resources. So a really great policy that I'm proud to have filed and to shepherd to passage. And thank you, Nicole, for uplifting that. We had 2 autistic kiddos drown this past week in our state. And so, yes, totally heartbreaking. And thank you, Nicole, for all your work and advocacy. You are a rock star. I am sad to say that our elopement prevention bill did not pass. It passed the House, but the Senate would not give us a hearing. So that will be policy that we will work on next year. I will not be in the legislature anymore as I term out this year, but I will be helping to make sure that the next generation of lawmakers lead the way on elopement prevention. We just had, to Nicole's point, children with autism are a huge risk of elopement. And unfortunately, because there's not an understanding of risk and there can be an attraction towards familiar locations like bodies of water or parks, children with autism may run into places of danger. And we have had recent drownings because of it. And so anything we can do to prevent elopement should be a priority for every lawmaker. So some other bills that passed that are really good that I want to uplift. House Bill 277, domestic violence and protective injunctions. And so this strengthens domestic violence prevention and ensures accountability for perpetrators of domestic violence. We saw legislation to protect our state parks by requiring more public notice when there's a proposed sales or land swap of public park and public land. And this is a really important issue to protect our state parks from being flipped with developers at low cost rates and hurting what are our precious ecosystems. We also saw the ADAP bill pass, and huge shout out to Michael Rayner on this one, who's an advocate from Broward County. You might remember that the state of Florida was going to allow for thousands of Floridians to not be able to afford their AIDS HIV medication. And so the legislature stepped up to pass a gap funding bill that the governor has signed into law that went into effect immediately upon signature. And so that means the Floridians who are in that situation will now have funding to afford their life-saving medication. And then for the budget debate in 2020, for the upcoming special session for the 26 to 27 budget, we will be fighting to ensure ADEP funding is in that budget as well. And yes, Gene, the coastal resiliency bill was a great win as well. Also, as the ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee and the State Affairs Committee, I want to uplift the taxation bill that we were able to pass. This is a really important bill because there were many special interests that were in opposition to this bill because it would have given large corporations a $3 billion tax break by co-signing President Trump's tax package that created a reduced corporate income tax rate. Florida already has a very low corporate income tax rate. And if we were to co-sign on President Trump's tax package for the federal tax code, it would have resulted in a revenue loss of $3 billion. And again, we just talked about what Florida's budget, where the money comes from, and where it goes, and how the bulk of revenue, general revenue, is sales tax. That's us. That's the everyday consumer. A very small percentage of Florida's budget is from corporations. And so this would have lessened their responsibility to contribute to state budgets. And so we actually, in a bipartisan fashion, decoupled from Trump's tax cuts, which means Florida maintained its current tax structure for the corporate income tax rate. We're not reducing it, we're not increasing it, we're keeping it the same. But that provides us with a steady source of corporate income tax revenue versus losing $3 billion in a corporate tax break. So really good policy, and we should be proud that it passed. And then data centers. Okay, a lot of conversation on data centers, right? This is another bipartisan issue where Republicans and Democrats have concerns about data centers, its impact on utility rates, on water, and of course, public access to understanding when or if a data center is trying to come into their community. So this was a bipartisan bill filed by Republican lawmakers. I will be very candid. It got watered down. So the first version of this bill included protection for ratepayers, protections on water quality, and a prohibition on non-disclosure agreements between local governments, economic development boards, and data centers. And it also included a prohibition on using incentives for data centers. Those two last elements that I just named were removed from the bill. And so it's not a perfect bill. I still voted yes on it because I thought something is better than nothing. But it is really important to continue to talk about this and to create a pressure on this issue because we do not want to lose our cityscape and our ecosystems to data centers. And we definitely don't want to spend public money on it because data centers are not job creators. There's not a lot of, obviously there's jobs in their construction, but those are short-term jobs. To run a data center is not a heavy employer. And so it's really important for us to continue to advocate on not just data centers, but also on AI. There was legislation filed that did not pass that would have protected children and prohibiting children from being able to use AI. It's like chatbots. And we've had tragic situations in our community of a child taking his own life because he was groomed by an AI chatbot that told him to do so. And there is litigation on this. There's discussions at a federal level about this. But, one of the challenges with government is that government does not keep up with the rapidly changing technology around us. And this is such an important arena for there to be parental education, parental knowledge, parental consent, and Unfortunately, that AI Bill of Rights bill did not pass, but this data center bill did. So I want to provide that context. Did many other states pass decoupling bills? Great question, Rachel. I'm actually not sure. I would assume yes, just because it's such a huge hit to local revenue. But I'm actually I I don't track. I don't have the capacity to track every other state legislature, but it's a good question. I definitely can find out. Okay, and then I just mentioned the statewide project for missing persons with special needs. This is a an effort to again protect children who elope by establishing a specific program for children and adults with autism who are at risk of elopement. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap up here, and then I'll see what more questions are there. Yeah, Katie Murphy, PTAs are working hard to keep up with the kids in tech. We love PTA. Thanks for being here. Okay, so real quick, we talked about this a little bit already, but I want to give it a little more attention. So April 20th is when the mid-decade redistricting special session has been called for. We don't have bills yet. We don't have maps that are publicly available yet, but it is very concerning because there is at this time a special session scheduled. And Lisa asked this question earlier about what's the point, right? And I have to agree because there already are congressional maps that overwhelmingly benefit one political party over the other. And when you draw maps mid-decade, not only are you creating what I would argue is a constitutional crisis, but you're also hurting all incumbents, including Republican incumbents. We redraw maps every 10 years with the US Census. There is no need to do this, and a lawsuit has already been filed to challenge mid-decade redistricting. But I want to make sure this is on your radar because it is still scheduled for April 20th. And so I want to make sure folks are watching this issue and are ready to engage on April 20th. I already mentioned the potential other special sessions. I should say that this morning, Governor Ron DeSantis mentioned that there could be up to 6 weeks of special sessions. That's the first time I'm hearing that type of announcement, but anything can happen. I'm hopeful that will not be the case because, again, as a reminder, as state representatives, we're paid part-time. So I have a day job on top of this, and obviously getting called back to Tallahassee for 6 weeks, it just pulls you away from your other responsibilities. It pulls you away from community events and engagements in the district. But of course, it is my duty to serve, and so I will respond to whatever the call is. But I definitely want to encourage folks to stay connected with us as a lot can happen between now and tomorrow, now and next week, now and 2 weeks. So definitely stay connected with us for those updates. So ways to take action, right? This is my last slide. So we actually finished on time, which is a miracle. But I might try to do a very quick screen share if y'all stick with me. But there's so many ways to get involved. If this was interesting to you, if you feel like you learned a lot and want to get more involved, obviously we're here as a resource. This is my last legislative session because I term out. We do have term limits in Florida, so we can only serve in our role for 8 years. That's 4 2-year terms. And so I am approaching the end of my term in November. But with that said, I still hope to be that resource on the legislature, on local government. And so rest assured that I and our team are exploring ways to continue being an important resource of information for state government because I know a lot of folks rely on us for that. And I don't want there to be a gap in the work that we do on local government education. But with that said, definitely want to encourage folks to get involved with local organizations that reflect the issues you care about, to register to vote, and to register other people to vote. And I am the executive director of a statewide nonprofit, People Power for Florida. We do voter registration drives on college campuses at community events. You're always welcome to join us for that. We'd love to have you be part of that. And also share what you've learned today with others because knowledge is power and not every person prioritizes local government, but you can be the difference for someone to want to know who their state lawmakers are. And so please, engage in that way and spread the knowledge that you've learned today. Okay, so I've already got some questions. With the 2 minutes I have with y'all, I'm going to do a very quick screen share if you continue to just entertain me for those 2 minutes because I just want to show you how you can track bills and how you can get more plugged into this process. So let me go ahead and share my screen one more time. Okay, so this is flhouse.gov. And I just want to show you that this website, everything I just talked about can be found on this website, right? And so we talked about the budget. If you click on 2026 budget documents, and so I don't know when my hand is raised, LOL, that you can actually see the current draft budget for the Florida House right here. It's a pretty big document. But you can look at this bill, right? And you can actually, like, if you click original file version, so this is like the title bill, right? But if you want to look at the actual line items, you can do that on myfloridahouse.gov. You can look at the full bill text right here. So this is the draft House budget. It's 501 questions, right? So let's just say if we wanted to look up a specific program, let's just say like arts funding. If I do arts, Control F arts. So I can see, right? Florida Arts and Tourism Economic Initiative, how much money that program's getting. Um, I can look at in specific community projects that are getting funding in different parts of the state. If I want to say, let me see the culture programs. So this is agriculture. If I go to Culture Builds Florida, sorry, I'm just gonna find it real quick. Let me see Culture Builds. So, this is how you can see. Look at all the you can see the money being allocated, right? So everything's here that you can play around and look at. If you want to find your lawmakers, you click representative and click find your representative. If you want to see what bills your lawmaker has filed, you can look them up. And I'll just go to my page real quick so you can see it. Eskamani. You can see sponsored bills. And then you can actually see, what bills have made their way through, what bills unfortunately did not make their way through, right? But like this one is the bill that passed, right? Laid on the table, and now it's Senate Bill 428. And if you want to look at that bill and read it, all you got to do is go to the bill that passed, right? And then click on enrolled. And this is the bill. It's only 4 pages, right? And it's pretty easy to read because you have a key down here that says words stricken are deletions, words underlined are additions. So you can see that we added the purpose of this program is to increase water safety and prevent drowning. So we added that language to current Florida law. Anything that is not underlined or italicized is current Florida law. And then we deleted this or younger and made it between the ages of 1 and 7. So reading a bill is not as hard as it sounds, right? I just want to encourage folks and empower you to engage at that level. And of course, I'm here as a resource. So let me just grab some last minute questions and then I'll go to my next Zoom because I have one more Zoom tonight. Let me see. Will the special sessions be on the Florida channel? Yes, they will be. Great question, Susan. Everything is streamed on the Florida channel. Actually, now you're making me want to share the Florida channel real quick. So if you're a political nerd and you want to learn more about the process and watch it live, this is a Florida channel. And you can click on video archives and you can watch all the meetings of Florida government. And Capitol Update is kind of like a weekly news show that covers what happened in Florida politics for the week. And you can go to past committee hearings. And of course, you can also watch things live as well. And so another great resource to be aware of. And then let me see what else we got there in the questions. A lot of kudos. I appreciate y'all's kind words. Thank you so much. And then, okay, John Burns asked, can you say a word about the governor and legislature's actions to control Florida college and universities? For sure. I think the biggest issue has been with academic freedom. And remember, we have a chance to talk about this, but things don't just stop with the legislature, right? So the reality is that when a bill passes, right? When a bill passes, then it goes to the governor either signs or vetoes it, and if the governor signs it and it becomes law, a agency implements the law. And so it's so important to be engaged with this process beyond the governor's signature because then it goes into implementation. And implementation can take all different shapes where it might not be implemented in the original intention of the bill. And so, in the context of the Board of Governors have really gone beyond what the legislature has requested by creating its own rules, for example, around sociology programs, around tenure. And of course, New College is an example where the governor changed the makeup of local board of trustees to pursue a political agenda. And the legislature right now is potentially going to give a piece of USF to New College to expand New College's campus. So that will continue in the budget silo, the budget debate. And that's why it's so important to continue to be as engaged as possible. Um, there beyond the bill that I talked about regarding domestic terrorism, um, there weren't too many other bills that passed that directly impact higher education beyond the higher education package, which obviously will include funding for higher education and so forth. But I would really watch the board of your board of trustees and the board of governors because that's where a lot of the changes take place. There actually was legislation around higher education, but it did not pass. So there was an effort um, to change the number of international students who can enroll and to also um, set criteria on in-state students compared to out-of-state students. But those changes did not pass. The one bill that did pass has to do with international students in the linkage program, and that bill will force linkage students to pay out-of-state tuition costs. And there were no changes to undocumented students, though there was an effort to prohibit undocumented students from even attending Florida college or universities. Right now, they have to pay out-of-state tuition. And these are our dreamers. These are kids that were brought to the United States and no choice of their own. They went to Florida high schools and they have aspirations to go to college. Right now, they can still go to our colleges and universities that are public, but they have to pay out-of-state tuition, which is a huge burden and barrier, obviously. But there was a bill that was going to restrict their ability from even attending, and that bill stopped. Okay. And then I think that was the last question. I'm just checking what else is out there. A lot of kind words. I really appreciate it. Thanks y'all for tuning in. And yeah, lawsuits also filed about Florida Kid Care. Appreciate that, Nicole. All right, y'all. I'm going to head and call it a night with y'all, but I so appreciate everyone being here, asking such thoughtful questions. I can't believe we finished in about 90 minutes. That must be a record because we covered a lot tonight. This will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube page so you can watch it later. For all my first timers out there, I hope this was informational and something that you want to keep doing more of. We'll continue to do voter education and make government as accessible as possible. It's really important that you get to be a part of this, right? That we break down the silos and make government as accessible as possible so government can be responsive to you and supportive of you and your goals and not a barrier that gets in your way. With that, much love and appreciation. Thank you everyone for tuning in and please stay connected with us. We'll, again, make sure you have these slides as well. But beyond that, I'm going to hop on my 7 o'clock Zoom that I have. I'm already a little late for it. So thank you for your patience with me. And I hope everyone has a blessed day and week. And if you are celebrating Easter, happy Easter. And I hope that I get to see everyone very soon. So with that, thank you again. And also thanks to our team for facilitating. I see Victoria, Madison, Jasmine here with me in the office and also at home. So thank you so much. And yes, Passover as well. Thank you, Katie. Didn't want to miss those holidays. Blessings to everyone who is celebrating holidays this week and next week. And with that, see everyone soon. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.